But I'd like to welcome everyone to the First Peoples Cultural Council's online learning series. We're going to be starting now. I invite you to turn your cameras on if you want. Today's webinar is Learning SÄNĆOԹEN through our Worldview, presented by MENEÞIYE. FPCC supports revitalization work for Indigenous communities all across what is known as British Columbia. First Peoples Cultural Council is grateful to have our home in the beautiful and traditional unceded territory of the SÄNEĆ people in the village of Jothaf. We have an additional satellite office at Tecumloops within the traditional territory of the Secwepemc people. We provide support throughout Indigenous homelands across what is currently called British Columbia and beyond. My name is Peter Underwood, and I'll be your host today. I am from SÄNEĆ and Norway. I'm also Samish and Nez Perce. My role at First Peoples Cultural Council is working as the Mentor Apprentice Program Navigator. I'm curious where you all are joining from today. So yeah, please share in the chat if you want. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenter for today. MENEÞIYE was one of my first SÄNĆOԹEN teachers back when she was a student teacher. I'm glad to say she's also my cousin, and she's been so instrumental to the development of language programs in SÄNEĆ in so many ways. She always seems to be learning more about the language and generously sharing what she knows. I'm thrilled to have her here today.
Hi, at den isolation tie enok. Nenu hila got den escuela kunis ella tie enok. Manathia fan snage slats net saitnich. Slats net artless. He looks in kunis ella. So I'm just glad to be here. Thank you for the invite to my relatives that are here with me today. So I squeechel the nishelacha, and then he got the nishquela quins ella tia enok, manathia the nesnedge slats net saitnich, it's in a lad charles patia enok. He looks in kunis ella. So just greetings to all of you that are here today. Thanks for joining in. So my name is MENEÞIYE, and I come from SÄNEĆ. I have roots in all four of the SÄNEĆ villages here, and I grew up here in Jothaf, but also have family roots in SÄOT, and Pawquetchon. I also come from the islands. We are island people, and so on my mother's side and my father's side, we come from SÄNC, which is main island. On my dad's side, we come from across the invisible line in SALtwater and the San Juan Islands. So we come from all throughout the Gulf Islands here. So if you take a look at the slide there, in that first picture, there is a picture of a mama wolf and her two pups. So my first job in this world is I'm a mom. I'm a mom to two daughters, Coquelwa and Chia. This is at the Neshquali. Coquelwa and Chia are the names of my reasons for living, and I really like this picture. On my father's side, we come from wolves, and so in this picture, that mama wolf, she looks really happy. She also looks a little bit tired, and that explains me really well. I'm always really happy to do the work that I do, and I'm always a little bit tired because it's a big job. That second picture on this slide is just a map of the territories that I come from. So I come from SÄNEĆ, which is on the southern part of Vancouver Island. But like I said, we're saltwater people, we're island people. And so I come from all of the islands as well. And so something that makes us a little bit different here in SÄNEĆ is that we don't have a river that runs through our community that brings the salmon to us, which meant that we went out into the islands to go fishing for the salmon using the SĽÁ, the reef net technology. So that gave us homelands in the islands in the summertime. And in the winter, we lived here. And if you looked at my community, which is, you can kind of see the inlets there, I grew up in SĽÁ. So the villages that we live in now were our winter homes, and our summertime homes were out in the islands while we were fishing. So those are my territories. That third picture there is a picture of me on top of Llewellyn Mountain, one of our most sacred mountains, with some of my students. And so I am a SÄNĆOԹEN immersion teacher at the NO噚ET SCULÁUTW. I've been working as a SÄNČOΘEN immersion teacher for about 12 years. So I'm going to share a little bit of that journey and the education that I took that led me there, and some of the work that I did at the NONET SCULÁUTW, that I do at the NONET SCULÁUTW. Our program is an outdoor education program, so we're up the mountains all the time. So that's just a picture of one of those days. The fourth picture there is just a picture that's just to say that I wear many, many different hats. I've worked at the SÄNEĆ School Board for, I started there when I was 21 and I'm 37 now. So for that long, my job has shifted and changed throughout the years, but I'm still there. I also work part-time for the University of Victoria in their SÄNC program, language program, and I also work at Camosun College, and I teach land, water, and stewardship and land and language there. All of the jobs I really love doing. It's just my dream, but I'm really busy working at many different places. So I come from the Elliots and the Underwoods and the Paul and the Bartleman families. So this is a little bit of my family here in front of us. On the top is my parents. Chachamalat the Snez the Natain, Istiwit the Snez the Namain. Chachamalat is my mom's name and Stiwit is my dad's name. They both come from SÄNEĆ. And on the bottom row are some of my grandparents. And this is where my language learning began, was in the home. So when we were really small, when we were really young, my grandfather asked my mother. So my grandfather is, the grandfather I'm talking about is my dad's dad, and he's on the bottom left-hand side. So his name was Penetch David Elliott Sr. And so he asked my mom, what is the language that you would need to speak to your babies in SÄN'OŊEN? Anything that you would need in the language, write it down in the book. On the right side, and if you open the book, she wrote all the English phrases that she would say to her babies all the time, often. And once she was finished writing all those phrases that she commonly used with us, he wrote on the left side all of the SÄN'OŨEN. So some of my earlier memories are my mom using those phrases that my grandfather gave to her to use with us when she'd come into our bedroom in the morning to wake us up. She's, ay, kuchillos kokolang. Good morning, my sunshine. And she'd open the curtains. And so those are some of my earliest memories of using the language. We were exposed to language a lot in the house, but it wasn't a fluent speaking home. My grandfather did a lot of work in the revitalization of the SÄN'OŨEN language, and so we have a lot of his work, but my parents did speak a bit of language in the home. Some of my earlier memories of the language too is that my grandmother and her brother, who is the fourth picture from the left on the bottom, his name was Cluckton Gabe Elliott, and my Gabe Bartleman, and my grandmother's name is Hothemia Beatrice Elliott. I remember them gathering together with our family in my parents' living room and my grandmother's living room, and we would gather together and we would listen to them tell stories in SÄN'OŨEN, which is our language. And I remember just the feeling of being so overjoyed to hear them speak to one another fluently in SÄN'OŨEN. And my parents had a green carpet in the middle of their living room, and all the kids would sit on there. Well, my Uncle Gabe was sitting on the couch with my gran, and they were speaking language to each other. My uncle was a really good storyteller, and I remember just laughing so hard we were crying. And I remember one of my cousins saying, do you even understand what he's saying? And we're thinking, I don't fully understand, but I do a little bit, but he is an amazing storyteller. Sometimes I would fall asleep on my grandma's couch and I'd wake up to her visiting with her brother and just remember thinking, that is the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. The prosody of the way that they spoke, the song of their language was really beautiful. And I just enjoyed sitting there and listening to them. And although when we'd get together with my family in our houses and listen to them tell stories, and sometimes there was a little chalkboard and they would write lessons on that chalkboard, I knew that we were there to learn language. I knew that it was a lot of fun, and it was my job and my sister's job to keep pouring tea for the elders that were there and our family that was there. And we were there having a good time, but I also felt like we were there because our family was scared about what was happening to the language, that we didn't want to lose the language. So we would purposely gather together to share stories amongst each other. So those are some of my earlier memories of the language. And that feeling of not wanting to lose the language and just how important the language was to my family really stayed with me throughout my whole life. And that was, my childhood years. And I really just thank and acknowledge my family for doing that, and my parents for hosting those language nights in their house. Were really, really good memories. And so that's where my language learning started. When I was going to elementary school, I went to our local SḷÁ school, and I learned language in the exposure programs there for about 30 minutes a day. And so I learned numbers and animals and commonly used phrases. I learned language that way for many years. But when I became a teenager and in my early 20s, I started to work in language. So the SÁNEĆ School Board has had these teachers working at the school board for quite a few years. So this is a picture of my uncle Jacinton, John Elliott, my auntie Lindy Quissinia Elliott, my auntie Cecilia. So there were 3 SÄNCOŊEN exposure teachers at the school for 35-ish years. And so my family that's here started to think about maybe what is going to happen when we retire. We've worked as language teachers for so long, but now what is going to happen when we retire? And so the school board put out a call for young people who wanted to learn the language and who wanted to become language teachers. And they were going to hire for 4 positions. And so I applied, and six young people applied, and they hired all 6 of us. And so our job was to apprentice under the language teachers that had been working at the school board for so long. So I worked with my uncle Jacinton John Elliott in his classroom, apprenticed under him, learned more language from him, learned how to become a SÄNCOÄN teacher from him, and really just followed him around in everything he did there for a couple years. And that was part of my earlier jobs. And part of our job as well was to hold elder sessions. And so we'd gather together all of the L1 speakers that we had at the time. And so now this is about 16 years ago. And we'd sit with the elders and listen to their stories and record their stories, talk a little bit about the SÄNCOÄN grammar, and really just try to build on our SÄNCOÄN proficiency. While I was working with them too, I started to look at the SÄNCOÄN language on a different level, and some of the earlier lessons that I got from my uncle Jacinton was how the worldview of a SÄNCOÄN speaker is different. And so he told us a lot of stories that he had learned from his elders, some SĆÖÁ, some creation stories. And so I just want to show you a couple examples of what I mean by that. And so if you look at these 2 words, this word here is hlewongoch. And so inside all of our SÄNCOÄN words, it will tell a story. SÄNCOÄN is very polysynthetic, and there are a lot of parts to one word that tells you every piece of that word is very important. So hlewongoch is the SÄNCOÄN place name for one of our most sacred mountains, not far from here. So when you take that word apart, hleu means escape. And the nguch part at the end, nguch means it has a really high level of spirituality. And so our SÄNCOÄN name for our sacred mountain is our place of escape, my place of escape. And so it was my uncle Jacinton that started to give us these lessons, that there are stories within each word, the SÄNCOÄN place names that we have all around here, and there are many. Every about 10 minutes, there's a different place name. Every nook and creek and mountain has its own SÄNCOÄN place name. Either in that it will tell you its creation story, the SÄN'OŊEN place name will tell you what you can harvest there, whether it's a good place for crabbing or it's a good place to gather medicines. It'll tell you that, or it'll tell you something that happened in the history, in our history, in those place names. So it's not just a name. When you understand the language and you're able to pull apart these words, it will really tell you something really important about that place. And then my fire just grew brighter when I started to realize, wow, these words are really beautiful. Just one single word can tell you a whole story. And so Llewellyn got its name in a time of flood. So people all around the world, they have the flood story. And in our story, it said that the people were hunting and they were taking too much and hoarding too much and letting their food spoil and wasting it. And so Cheops, the creator, he's seen the way that the humans were living and that they were taking too much food and letting it waste. And so he told some of the people that he was going to flood the earth. And so the waters started to rise, and some of the people prepared their canoes. The waters rose higher and higher. Some of the people that didn't listen, they perished in the waters. And waters rose higher and higher until all they could see was the top of an arbutus tree. And so they paddled over to the top of that arbutus tree, and they used a cedar rope that they brought with them to tie themselves to the top of that arbutus tree to anchor them to their land. And the waters rose even higher than that until they couldn't see anything. And after about 10 days, their food started to run out and their water started to run out, and they became really afraid of what was going to happen to them. And they started to pray. They started to ask Cheops to take pity on them and to help them. And then a tot landed on the bow of their canoe. That raven was holding a long stick in its mouth. And they took that as the answer to their prayers. And the waters started to recede. And when they landed on top of our mountain, Llewellyn. And so they acknowledged that day that that arbutus tree anchored them to their homeland and allowed them to stay anchored to SÄNEĆ and not to float away. And so they decided that they weren't going to use the cocoich, the arbutus tree, for anything, and that we would honor it in that way. And the mountain gained that name, Llewellyn, my place of escape. It helped us to survive the flood. And so one of our most special places, and that second word here is SCULÁUTW. SCULÁUTW. So SCULÁUTW is our SÄN'OŊEN word for trees in general. And you can take apart that word as well. So if you look at the example below there, the S at the beginning, the S makes it a noun. Cult means that it's weak or bad. El means it was put away. And again, just like Llewellyn, that nguch at the end tells me it has a really high level of spirituality. And so when you put all of those pieces of that word together, it means the bad ones that were put away. You think, why are our trees in general the bad ones that were put away? And it comes from their creation story of a time when there were giant people. The giant people were tasked with taking care of the humans like us, and they had the same, or protecting, offering a little bit more protection to the humans like us. They had the same laws that we had, but they were tasked with protecting the humans. And after a while, they forgot those teachings that they got, and they started to use their size and their strength for their own advantage. And so started to become a little bit lazy, having the humans complete some of the tasks that they were supposed to do. And so when Chayil seen that the way that they were living, he wanted to talk to them, but really they didn't have the time of day for him. And they said, well, Chayil, you made us big and you made us strong. We can take care of ourselves now. You can leave us alone. And after a while of him trying to talk to them, they didn't want to talk to him. So then he was frustrated with them. And he went back again to try and talk to them, but he was angry and frustrated. And those giant people could sense how angry he was with them. And then they became afraid of him. They could feel that he was going to do something. So they started to run away into the fields and into the mountains. And he watched them scatter in many different directions. And he just yelled, Anno, and their feet stopped. And their feet couldn't run anymore. Their feet grew into roots into the ground. And their arms turned into branches. And they turned into all of the skalelngoch that we see today. And so that's the one word for trees in general, skalelngoch. It tells its hoyam. It tells its creation story. And so when my uncle started telling us these stories and we realized that the story is right there in its name. When we didn't know this before, it really started to change the way I was looking at the language, how ancient the language is, and how sacred the language is, how really precious it is, and that it gives us a connection to Mother Earth. The language really gives us a connection to Mother Earth. And on a deeper level, when I go to the mountains and we say, you know, you ache for the SÄNĆOŊEN language. You want to learn the language, our uncle used to say. Remember when you go to the mountain that the trees ache for SÄNĆOŨEN too. SÄNĆOŨEN comes from this land. English doesn't come from this land. When you go up the mountain, you make sure that you greet the trees in the language. They ache for it too. So when I go up the mountain all the time, so when I go up the mountain, greet the trees in the language, talk to the medicines. And times when I'm feeling lonely for somebody to talk to, make sure that I talk to them. And so these are just two examples out of many, many examples that almost all SÄNĆOŨEN words, you can take it apart and it has a deeper meaning. And so it really grew a really deep appreciation for the SÄNČOŊEN language, for my language. It's really, really beautiful. Part of my job as being a SÄNČOŊEN apprentice at the SÄNC School Board was I needed to build my proficiency in SÄNČOŨEN. And so I was apprenticing with my uncle in his classroom on how to become a SÄNČOŨEN teacher, but I needed to build on my proficiency. So one of the jobs I was tasked with was doing a mentor apprenticeship. And so first I worked with my uncle here. He's on the left side. His name was Huichalak, and he worked with us in the language department. He was L1 speaker of SÄNČOŨEN and became a really, really good friend of mine. And so the people that were organizing us let us know that we were going to be able to do a mentor apprenticeship and that we had a little bit of funding from the First Peoples Cultural Council to do so. And FPCC came through and they trained us. What is the mentor apprenticeship? What is the mentor apprenticeship methodology? And so really what it means is that you spend at least 300 hours a year together, immersed in the language, no English at all. And so we decided that we were going to work together, he and I, and a cousin of mine joined us as well. And we would go to his house 3 times a week and learn language. And at the time, I really was just speaking like a baby, like a real, just minimal talk. And I remember the first time that I went to his house, he was just trying to tell me to go make some tea and how to make tea. Through the training, realized just create activities together, whether it's cooking together, whether it's going shopping at the store together. Have a plan. What is your plan? What are you going to do that day? Try and introduce yourselves to new language domains, but have a plan. But just don't speak English and don't write. And so our first day was us making tea together. And he says, yes, go to the cupboard, grab the tea. And I remember just being so lost. I had no clue what he was saying to me. And I was walking around his kitchen saying, Tia, Neil, is it this? Is it that? You know, and he was laughing. We were both having a really good time. And but we got the tea made. Took me way longer than it would have, you know, otherwise, but the goal was language learning. And so once I realized what he was saying it over and over again. I was able to repeat what he was saying and learn a little bit of language. And so those are the methodologies that he and I practiced was language. And when we were guided to record all of our language sessions together, and when I go back and listen to those recordings now, I realize what an amazing teacher he is. And he was so gentle with me. You know, I'm making huge mistakes and saying some really crazy things, just trying to communicate. And in the recordings, he just kind of laugh and chuckle a little bit and continue on. And I really always just want to acknowledge him for that because he's really the one who brought the language out of my mouth. And just by the way that he taught, and he was so guided me in the right direction, gave me a lot of the vocab that I needed, and was so patient with me when I really needed it in the beginning. He was a fisherman and knew the ocean really well. And so we talked a lot about being out on the water, his fishing stories. I have some cool recordings of him talking about battles he had with the wind. And I remember thinking, it sounds like he's having a battle with a woman and in the wind. But realizing that there's a SዏÁ there and our winds have characteristics. The wind he was talking about has a female characteristic, and that's another long story. I won't share that one today. But I had heard a lot of stories about his fishing trips. I remember standing outside with him, and he was talking about the stars. And he said, "See the way the handle of the Big Dipper is facing? That's telling me that the sockeye are in the straits or in our islands around us." And I remember looking at the stars thinking, wow, that's not what I see when I look at the stars. And he just had a brilliant knowledge about the ocean and fishing and our way of life out in the water. And so I really learned a lot from him. And this next picture here is my aunt Sakashlia and Jimmy. And I worked with her as well, doing mentor apprenticeship. And I did a lot of time and hours working with Huichalak. And then when I went to go work with Sakashlia, I realized that this was a new language domain. Our very first day we got together, we were cooking a meal together. And I remember, I don't know how to say peel the potato. And then asking her, "Oh, I don't know how to say this, peel the potato." This was a brand new language domain for me. And she said, peel the potato. I remember that. And so we spent a lot of time cooking and preparing meals together. She was also it was crafting a lot. She was a really brilliant knitter. And so we spent a lot of time around the table crafting together. And so that was a new language domain for me. And both of them just so patient with me. And we had a lot of fun and built a really good friendship. I would say this is one of my biggest treasures that I've had in this journey is being able to build relationships with my family, strong relationships with my family and learning language from them. It has been really, I don't know what I've done to deserve it because it's been really beautiful and I appreciate it every day. Sorry, it's hard for me to talk about it because I really am just I appreciate the time that they gave me, and I'm able to speak the language because of this time I spent with my family. When we were working in the language department, when we were hired on, we also knew that we wanted to start an immersion program, a SÄNĆOŊEN immersion program. And so at the same time we were learning language, we started a language program. And it was really like building the plane while it was already flying in the air because we were learning language at the same time. We were going through our Bachelor's of Education program. And so we were doing all this different work so we could open a SÄNĆOŨEN immersion program. And we did open one in 2009. Today, we're just growing every year. So we have K4 to grade 11 right now. We have about 100 SÄNĆOŨEN immersion students, and it's an outdoor education program, all in the language. And I realized pretty quick that a really good way to learn the language is to teach the language. And I know that we did what we needed to do. If we waited until our language was perfect, we wouldn't have started. We would have kept putting it off for a long time. And so we opened up the NOឭET SCULÁUTW in 2009, and it just really did mean that it was a lot of work at the same time, but it is joyful work. I work with my family, and we were working towards SÄNĆOŨEN language revitalization. So it was really work from our heart. And my family and I, the other teachers and I, would be up in the middle of the night creating curriculum, and we know how that goes. But the best way for me to learn the language was I had to study it if I was going to teach it the next day and be accountable to the way that I was teaching it. And so I realized really quick by teaching the language, it really sticks because I have to be accountable to it. And so we also have a SÄNĆOɁEN Bachelor's of Arts degree through the University of Victoria, partnership with a SAINTNICH college. And so it's a 4-year program. And so when I started teaching for UVic as well, it just really it helped my own learning because adults have different questions than children have. My very first year teaching adults, and they were asking me all these questions. Why does it work that way? Let's put it on the board and break it all apart. Let's research the grammar. And these are questions that children didn't ask me. And so this really helped me when I was learning as well as to teach adults. And they're learning at a really rapid rate, these students. We have about 40 UVic students, and I'm impressed. I'm really impressed with them. After 4 years, they're able to stay in the language for a few hours, and it's really quite beautiful. For about the last 10 years, I've been working with my aunt SḷÁ. And so there was a time when I was kind of lonesome for somebody to talk to. Those people that I grew up with, my gran was up the hill, and people that were really close to me in my life, I didn't have them anymore. And I was really just lonesome for that relationship and somebody to talk to and in the language. And I remember having a dream about my grandfather, and he was saying, um, you're not the only one that had students. I had students too. And that's really all I remember from the dream. But when I woke up, I was thinking, wonder why my grandfather was saying that to me. I was just curious. And in the late 70s and early 80s, my grandfather gathered together the L1 speakers at the time and would have language classes with them. And they recorded a lot of really amazing language at the time. And I was going through this list of students because I have the list of his students at the time. And my aunt was on the list. Her name is SḷÁ Lavina Charles. And her and my mom are first cousins. We're really closely related to her, but I had never spoke to her before. And I was thinking, I wonder what would happen if I went and I would just go visit her and see if she would work on language with me. And so I had all this anxiety about just putting myself out there, and just going to visit. But I did so, and it was like she was waiting for me. She just took me right in. She said, yeah, we're family. Yeah, come in anytime. Let's work on language. And so that was about 10 years ago. It's been a long time. She's a beautiful, beautiful person through and through. She is so gentle and so kind and just the embodiment of what we know a SÁNEĆ person to be. So giving of everything that she has, her knowledge, she's willing to share with us. And she's hilarious too. We get together and just have a hoot. But she was raised by her great grandparents. She was raised by her great grandparents. And so the level of language that she has is really high. And I remember when I was talking to my gran when I was, a teenager, she'd say to me, you have to speak SÄNĆOŊEN with a SÄNĆOŊEN mind. You cannot speak SÄNĆOԹEN with an English mind. And I used to think to myself, I don't really know what she means by that. I don't fully grasp on why this is so important. Is my English accent really strong? And it probably was. But I just think about these words that my gran would share with me all the time. And one of the first times I went out to see my aunt Spaltanat, she was asking me in the language, where are your flowers? You got to think about what is that good nourishment you're going to put into the soil so your flowers grow strong. And I was kind of puzzled and I was thinking about what she was saying to me in SÄNĆOŊEN. Hey, where are my flowers? And what is that good nourishment I'm going to put into the soil so my flowers grow strong? But I didn't bring my daughters with me. I didn't bring my baby with me. And she was asking about my daughter. And the way that she was speaking about my girls was really beautiful and almost like poetic. And it was just like a light bulb for me. Like, this is what my grandma was saying to me all those years. You have to speak SÄNĆOԹEN with a SÄNĆOԹEN mind. The phraseology of SÄNČOΘEN is very different than English. And so I really started to think about the way that she was speaking and the phraseology that she used. A lot of the time is really, really beautiful and poetic and metaphorical and in a real SÁNEĆ way. And I just really appreciated those times. I'd just be moved to like tears listening to her, and she's like, "Go, girl, like you're so silly." Like it just sounds so beautiful to me. And so we started to focus on the phraseology in SÄNC'OFEN. I'll come back to that in a second. Some of the earlier parts of the work that her and I did together was just talking about how to ask questions in SÄNC'OFEN. And so what I knew, I realized was minimal. I knew what questions. Staying on Chatia, what is this? Sena Chatia, who is this? But we have very different words in SÄNC'OFEN for asking questions. And so I'm going to get into a whole language lesson here, but there are very SÄNC'OFEN specific ways to ask questions. And in my mind, I was saying, sting acha tia. Sting acha the squale at. What is the word for? But we have a specific word for asking, like what did you say? And it's init. Init acha. What did you say? So it's a different than staying, which is what. It's what say. Init acha. And then instead of saying achin for where, it's tween, which is where going. If I was asking Peter, where are you going? I'd say twichonswacha. And so we started to spend some time, how do I ask questions? When I thought I knew, I really didn't know. If you say, what's another one? Chuntang is when, but then you can say queen for how many. So we just went over all of these shtetelangskvel, questioning words. And so this was another, I always feel like I plateau. Then I realize, oh, still have a long ways to go. Then I plateau, oh, I've learned quite a bit. No, I still have a long ways to go. I'm going to be learning language my whole life. I realized that. So we went over a lot of these questioning words. If I can master these questioning words, it'll open up our conversation by a lot. And then I just put this Post-it in there because sometimes when you don't have somebody to talk to around the house, I put up these questions around my house. So this one that says tween squatcha, which means where are you going? It's on my door before I leave the house. So even if nobody's asking me where I'm going in the language, then I say, read this tween squatcha, where are you going? And in my head, I'm answering this question. Yes, and I'm going to the store. In my mirror in my bedroom, it says stong it squatcha. What are you doing? And in my head, even if I'm not saying it out loud, I'm answering it. So when I see these Post-its around the house, I'm learning the questioning words, but I'm also replying to them. And I'd really encourage you, if you haven't done it already, to do just this, because you'll memorize those questioning words and be able to carry on a little bit of a conversation, even if it's just with yourself. It really does help. Something else we did, and so her and I were working together in COVID times, and we had to work together on the computer. And we did a lot of YouTube wordless books. And so FPCC gives us these books, and I have a couple books from them. And they're just books that don't have any words, and so you go through and you tell each other the story, ask each other questions about it. But what we realize in language is that learning language is like a spiral staircase, that you come back to the same activities, but you come back at a higher level. And so we'd go over these books. What started out was really basic language, and then we'd go back to it at a higher level. I'd be able to use a little bit of a higher level of language. And if we kept going back to these books and asking each other different questions about it, this was really useful. To YouTube wordless books, there's a couple hundred different wordless books on YouTube that are really handy for learning language. I just drew these pictures in there because if any time I was stumped for things to talk about or things that would bring out language, we talk about cooking food together and traditional food. It was always the go-to, and it would bring out stories every time. different times that she went fishing with her great-grandfather, different times that we were clam digging, all the different foods that we like to eat. If you talk about food, it's going to bring out lots of good language. I think that's for anybody. The different places that we like to eat, what are the best restaurants? And so that was always something that we went to for bringing out more language. So this is just a quote from her, and I think it's kind of cut off on my end. Níl enw chwlngwch ddysgwnnings the alchwlngwch, cwsiems the jysings the ngananas, awchs colnochs, awchs tlat the sgwelican who aid all, yathu achang the najamch, chwnengach spakang the ngana, yathu age slai aitsa kwistisans. So it's just a quote talking about, she says, my great-grandmother used to say that your children are like flowers. You must always protect their environment that they're in so that they can continue to grow strong. Don't be harsh with your words. Make sure that you're just being gentle with them and soft with them. And that's really the approach that she has. And it's I really appreciate that. And so when I was talking to her, where am I going to go? I'm going to go here. And so when I first started going out to visit her, my girls were still babies. They were still really small. And I said, you know, I really want to be able to raise my daughters in the language, but there's a whole bunch of language that I don't know. One of the first things I said to her is, you know, I really want to tell my daughters, I love you. That really strong emotion that a mother has for their babies, I want to tell them that I love them, but I don't know how to say it in SÄNĆOŊEN. And we commonly say this first one that you see there, nestles, nestles. And I can hear in that right away that it's an English phrase translated into SÄNĆOŨEN. I can hear it right away. Nestles. Na is like my, sli is to want, or it's important. Soch is you. I can hear it. I really want, or it's been interpreted as love. We don't really have a straight word for love. Soch, you. So I can hear that. And I was explaining that to her one day. You know, I want to tell my girls I love you, but I want to say it the right way. And she said, yeah, I thought about that before. And she said, one thing I can remember my great-grandmother saying to me is, so that second part down there, you can see, which just means I wrap you in my good medicine. And she said, that's how you tell your babies that you love them. That's the SÄNĆOŊEN phrase that we use. I wrap you in my good medicine. And I just thought that was so beautiful. And those were the kind of things that I was looking for. And so we started to talk about all of the different SÄNĆOŨEN language that is needed to raise our babies. The phraseology is specific to SÄNČOŊEN. And so I started to say, you know, I want to say honey or sweetie to my girls. And I don't know really what are some endearment terms. And so she said to me, see this last one on the bottom of the screen? Nashkhali. Nashkhali. She said, you can say that to your girls. Nashkhali. Nashkhali means my reason for living. And that's the SÄNČOŨEN endearment term. Nashkhali. They're your Nashkhali. And I just thought that was so beautiful. My reason for living. Nashkhali. So I start calling my girls that. They start asking, is there anything else? And say, oh, I remember getting to my grandparents' house and they'd say, kanak, kikanak. And those are the words that we use for endearment terms. It's just like, how we would say, honey or sweetie. Those are the SÄNČOŨEN words that we used. And so we spent a couple years just talking about some of the terminology that we use in SÄNČOÚEN when we're raising babies. Those pictures are my girls. Coquel and Chia when they were babies on the top, and then just this last spring. So we started to gather and adding to the parent phrase book that my grandfather made for my mother when we were young. We started to add on that and showed her the book. These are all the phrases that my grandfather wrote for my mom, in the early 80s. And then we started to add on there. I let her know, the first words that we would say to our babies once they're born. So we put together almost what would be like a poem together. First things that a grandmother, it was meant for my mother, and things that she would say to her new grandbabies, introducing that baby to SÄNEĆ, introducing the baby to their mother and to their father and to their lineage, and just some of the first words that you would say to a baby once they're just really brand new. I told her, I don't know the language for changing a baby's diaper. What is a diaper even called? I didn't know. I'd never heard young parents raise their babies in the language. And that's nobody's fault but colonization, right? And so what is the name for a diaper? SŊOɁEN is the name for a diaper. What is all the language for all of that in that language domain of changing a baby's bum? I didn't know it. And so we spent some time working on that. Some of the vocab for a new baby and some of the different vocab needed for the birthing process we worked on. We worked on some more endearment terms and things that you could say to your children. Some of the language that you need when you're naming a baby, we worked on that together. There's some old recordings of some of our elders talking about the teachings for a new baby, the protocols that we follow when a mom is carrying a baby. So we translated some of that. There's different ceremonies that take place once a baby's born, and we worked on the language around that. The babysitting language, sleeping language, how to talk to your baby to get dressed. So we know that when you have a new baby, you talk to them all the time, nonstop, even though they're not really responding to you. There's a lot of language there. So different language for getting dressed. I didn't know how to say, put your arm in the sleeve. And so just simple things like that we worked on together. And my girls, when they were small, they wanted me to sing You Are My Sunshine over and over and over and over again. I've sang You Are My Sunshine a few hundred times or more. And so we started to think about lullabies in the language. So the SÄNĆOɁEN word for a lullaby is a he'enung, he'enung. And so I told her about the You Are My Sunshine that I wanted to translate it. So we translated You Are My Sunshine. She also had some memories of her great-grandmother singing lullabies to her. And so I have recordings of her singing those songs, and they're really beautiful and very different from the lullabies. They're very different from You Are My Sunshine, and they're about Raven. And so she kind of acted them out when she was singing them, and they're very specific to who we are. And so we recorded those lullabies together. And I really wanted to talk about the language to breastfeed a new baby. And so we went over that language as well. And so it's about 200 pages long, this document that we worked on for vocab that we need to use to raise our children. Let's see. I focused on the early years when babies are brand new, and the language shifts a little bit when the children grow up into be toddlers. And so Shayla Squale vocab to use with our friends and family, language around them crawling, discipline and behaviors, like if you touch that, you'll get burnt kind of things, greetings, manners, expectations, reminders. So I'll let you take a look at this list. We went over all of these different topics and talked about the language there. And I remember just feeling like all of this language was brand new to me in the way that we talk to our babies. So I was walking through UVic one day, the UVic bookstore, and I seen this book on the shelf. And I stopped in my tracks because that's my family in the picture, my ancestors. And what is this book? The SÄNEĆ and Their Neighbors. This picture that's on the front is a really famous picture. I've definitely seen this picture before, but I didn't know there was a book out there. So I picked up the book. And so the man that's on the left-hand side, his name was Jochilaptin, and he's the man that raised my aunt Spaltanat. And she spent a lot of time with him. So he's my great-great-grandfather and her great-grandfather. And so I started to show her this book. And in the early 1900s, around 1903, a man named Diamond Jeunesse worked with some of our ancestors, my great-great-grandfather included, and started to record a bunch of their SĆOɁEN. So the man in the middle is David Lattès, and the man on the right is Edward Jim. And inside the book, there was a whole bunch of SĆOǳEN, our creation stories, about 50 or 60 different Sኢና that were told by our ancestors. And so she wanted to go over them because they were from her great-grandfather. Sorry, excuse me. And we started to translate those stories together. The stories, a lot of them I hadn't heard before. All of them super beautiful. We translated those together with the goal that they were going to be for the teenagers in our high school. Some of them are long stories and all loaded with Indigenous law and SÄNEĆ law and how we should live here on this land. A lot of really important lessons in those stories. So we translated about 50 stories together, and all of which I have here and will be put into a book at a later date. We've just recently worked on them as well. A lot of really great stories that we put together. All of the goal of, we have the baby years, the language that you need for brand new babies, language for toddlers, and then these SĆOǳEN would be for the children and the teenagers. And just more recently, since I've been teaching at the university, we've had to do a lot of research and learning on the SÄNCOɁEN grammar. And so the SÄNCOŨEN grammar was put out by Tim Montler just a couple years ago. And so we're using this in our university class. And so when I'm thinking about the linguistics of the language, it really kind of boggles me sometimes. Yes, I know this, but I don't know how to explain it to adults. And so researching the grammar. And Spaltanat is an L1 speaker. So then I bring this to her and she's, yes, this is how you can say it, and just reinforces the grammar with me. So we've been working on this together. So all of this journey that I've had over the last 16 or 17 years, it's been a long journey. It wasn't quick for me to learn the language. I'm still learning the language. I'm going to be learning the language for the rest of my life. But I realized that it wasn't going to happen quick. There was nowhere in the world that I could go and just be fully immersed in the language where there were, even a couple dozen people just speaking the language. We didn't have that. So the language learning was steady. And we had to search out these places where we could find the language. But through this journey that I've had, I've built some really strong relationships with my family. And I'll always be grateful for this opportunity. It's really just my dream job. I can't believe it's my job to do this, to learn language and then bring it back to our school, continuously searching out different places where I can add proficiency and then bring it back to the children that are at our school. It's been a beautiful journey, and I'm so grateful for all of it. And just grateful for whomever's here today listening to my story and for the invitation from FPCC. Grateful for today. So, I think that's all I have to share. And I'll just maybe open it up for questions from anybody, if anybody has any questions or comments.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So much for sharing today about all the important work and lessons you learned along the way. It's been really insightful to see kind of a bit into your learning and your career. Really inspiring too to hear about the work that you've done, and also I've heard a bit about the stories with your mom and the terms around family words too. So it's really nice to hear more about that. Thank you so much. I raise my hands to you. MENEÞIYE, thank you so much for sharing everything today. It's been so special, and it's you have such a good way of speaking and telling stories and talking about your journey. I could really learn from that, just your presence. Yeah, and thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. Thank you so much for the great webinar.
Aish Fasian.